Andy Warhol once famously said that in the future everybody would be famous for 15 minutes. And as we survey the present in which we currently live, it seems like it's probably pretty close to the future that Mr. Warhol envisaged 50 or so years ago. Because in the year 2021, it's easy to become world famous for 12 hours or a day, even a couple days. And you don't have to have any exceptional skills or talents. You don't even have to be particularly good at anything. All you need to do is accost a public figure with whom you disagree politically, shriek a bunch of childish epithets in their face, and of course have a buddy standing by to get the whole thing on video. Now, if you really hit the jackpot, let's say you're in rural Montana somewhere and you run into Tucker Carlson and his daughter at a fishing tackle store. And you tell him, you get right up in his face and tell him the top 5 meanest things that you've ever read about him on the internet. Then you have got it made, bruh. Get ready to be on all 3 network newscasts. Get ready for appearances on every primetime fake news sludge fest on CNN and MSNBC. Get ready to be the darling of HuffPo and the Daily Beast and BuzzFeed and every other worthless digital fish wrap on the entire interwebs. And get ready for your social media feed to totally blow up with rapturous missives about how you sure owned the cons this time, man. And look, if you haven't seen the video, there's nothing really interesting or noteworthy about it, except for the fact that we have come to live in such a perversely backward version of civil society that accosting a man who's getting supplies for a fishing trip with his kid and talking some half-baked bullshit for 45 seconds to 1 minute and getting it on video is actually enough to earn someone widespread public acclaim. And if that is not Andy Warhol being 100% correct in his prognostication of our future, then I don't know what the hell is. First of all, I've heard some of this guy's apologists, and I am not going to say his name for the same reason I wouldn't say the name of an assassin or a spree shooter, saying that what he did is okay because he didn't raise his voice. So if I have it correctly, if you maintain a sufficiently modest volume level, then it's okay to accost a man who's shopping with his little girl? Is that really what we're going with here? Because I have 5 words. Nope, 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 nope. There is no justification whatever for interrupting someone's father-daughter activity and creating a confrontational situation, irrespective of the volume level of your voice, just because you want to be the star of a viral video and get your delicious 15 minutes of fake stardom. You owe an apology to that little girl, asshole, because I guarantee your subdued tone of voice and calmish sort of demeanor didn't make it any less traumatic for her. You know why? Because when you're a little kid, your parents getting into any kind of confrontation is absolutely terrifying. Myself, I grew up back when it wasn't uncommon for dads to settle traffic disputes by pulling over and engaging in some macho male posturing. At worst, there would be a bit of pushing and shoving or maybe a couple of half-assed punches. But when you're the little kid in the car who is watching that scene play out, you're wondering if your dad's going to come back alive. You don't know it's just ritualistic posturing, so it's scary as hell. You're too young to know that. And it isn't any different in a store just having some random stranger start saying hateful things to your dad who is just trying to take you on a fishing trip. And there's one other thing that's hard to miss in the video, and that's that Captain Intellect here, the guy who instigates this incident, the guy who the left-wing internet seems to think acquitted himself so very well, never tries to name anything that Tucker lied about or got wrong or anything like that. What does he go with instead? Well, he goes straight to the "you are the worst human being known to mankind" card, and yikes. I have to say I am a bit offended by his gendered language here. This guy's going to get his leftist card revoked if he keeps using outdated sexist words like mankind. And I'm sure it must come as a great relief to guys like Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Bashar Assad, Kim Jong-un, Chairman Xi, Vladimir Putin, even Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is still alive somewhere running the remnants of Al-Qaeda so far as we know, for them all to know that Tucker Carlson, pudgy, middle-aged, milquetoast, centrist cable news host, is the worst person in the world and not any of them. So the extent of this idiot's material, which he had plenty of time to rehearse beforehand since he had time to put his buddy in exactly the right spot to get the perfect camera angle, was number 1, Tucker is the worst person in the world, and number 2, he actually literally kills people with COVID misinformation, or so claims the accoster. And this is a very, very common theme with our friends on the left now. The intimation that if you say something that is factually, verifiably true, even something you got from official CDC statistics, but you interpret or parse it in a way that the left finds upsetting or displeasing or rhetorically inconvenient, then damn it, that's misinformation, and you're a murderer who enjoys watching your victims die. And it's kind of remarkable that we've come to a point where there are no longer any intermediate steps between I disagree with your argument and you're a murderer? And look, I'm not one to say I told you so. Actually, yes, I am. But this stuff we've been witnessing the past 18 months or so with the massive, unprecedented power grab by the public health industrial complex, I saw it coming, and I damn well told people I saw it coming. Because we find ourselves today at the bottom of a very particular slippery slope. And we got there largely through our own apathy and our own inattention. And that's what the main segment is going to be about tonight. So Jim Eagle, hit my damn music if you please, sir. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where silence is never violence, except when you forget to tell your buddy there's a flaming arrow headed straight for his eye socket. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And we need to talk about cigarettes. Now, myself, I smoked cigarettes from age 15 to age 39, and when I decided to quit and switch to vaping, I wound up quite unintentionally doing a several years long deep dive down the rabbit hole, and it's a deep one, of tobacco policy and the tobacco control industry in specific, and let no one tell you it's not an industry. Let no one tell you it's populated by well-intentioned public health professionals, and most importantly, let no one tell you it's populated by people who have any desire whatever to see cigarette smoking disappear. Because if that ever happened, their careers and all their political power would go right along with it. But it was an interesting time to wind up diving down that particular rabbit hole because, as it turns out, I was doing it right at the same time that the tobacco controllers were starting to see their people get big, powerful jobs in national mainstream public health agencies. It used to be, and we have to go back to the early part of this century and the latter part of the last, that tobacco control was sort of its own thing, and there was a wall of separation, if you like, between the loony tobacco control nutters and the more sober-minded public health professionals. Well, it first started happening in the UK and Australia, where professional career tobacco controllers, barking mad maniac political activists who would not know the truth if it punched them in the dick and stole their wallet, started being appointed to respectable senior positions in their country's legitimate public health establishments. And that was a real inflection point. Because after that, you may not know it, but two of our past three CDC heads, professional tobacco controllers. FDA, NIH, both fully infested with tobacco controllers as well. And Rochelle Walensky, the jittery basket case, who by some improbable accident of history is the current head of the CDC and also a former tobacco controller, she was nice enough to let the mask slip a few days ago. She said the quiet part out loud, whichever cliche you prefer, but she said, when asked about effective ways of applying psychological pressure to the unvaccinated so they'll go and get the jab, she said this, quote, "We just need to do the same thing we did with secondhand smoke." And that is the slippery slope on whose bottom we currently sit. But it begins, like I said, in the early part of this century and the latter part of the last, when tobacco control was still largely populated by people who weren't good enough to get jobs in the respectable mainstream public health establishment. Tobacco control lived on the fringes of public health back then, but there was never any real lateral movement of personnel between the one and the other. And the smokers' rights groups, similarly, lived on the fringes of the political spectrum, and they were populated exclusively by smokers. But if there's anything in American politics in the last 40 to 50 years that people from across the spectrum have agreed upon, it's that they don't give a damn what happens to smokers. Cigarettes are icky, they sneered, and even conservatives and libertarians who would never express such sentiments about anything else voted overwhelmingly in favor of every onerous tobacco tax increase that came up on the ballot, Because after all, they said, I don't smoke cigarettes. Cigarettes are disgusting. What the hell do I care if a pack of smokes costs $1 more? What the hell do I care if the disgusting smoker has to walk half a mile away to have a cigarette? Because I don't want to smell that. Let him walk. But even with all of their stupendous successes in getting people to vote millions of dollars directly into their own pockets with every tobacco tax increase, and make no mistake, that's what it was, the tobacco controllers still had a problem. They didn't know where their next beachhead was going to be. They needed a new frontier, a new venue for grabbing more money and more power while pretending it was all about improving public health. But no new frontier seemed to be presenting itself. The smoking rate had stalled out at around 25%, even after they had succeeded in banning all indoor smoking in all venues except private residences and nearly all outdoor smoking in public venues. They found it increasingly difficult to move the needle after that in any meaningful way. And by meaningful, I mean in a way that results in the tobacco controllers having nicer cars and bigger houses. But then, like so much manna from the heavens, came secondhand smoke. The fanciful idea that human beings can actually be killed by smelling someone else's cigarette smoke. And right now, today, an overwhelming majority of Americans, you might be one of them, believe that claim to be true. Because why question it? Smoking is gross. If they say it kills innocent bystanders, why should I question that? I'm not a smoker. Who gives a shit? Now, first of all, anyone should give a shit who cares about believing things that are true. But let's just subject the theory of secondhand smoke to the common sense test. Because when does anyone do that? If passively smelling someone else's cigarette smoke is sufficient to cause death in a bystander, then shouldn't smoking be instantly fatal to the smoker himself? Because you can't have it both ways. It's either that noxious or it isn't. And in point of fact, it isn't. But thanks to a Hollywood-level budget, because tobacco tax has been very, very good to me, and some great marketing, the secondhand smoke myth was successfully sold to more people than probably any mythical load of bullshit in modern American history, except maybe the myth that the desiccated corpse of former segregationist Senator Joe Biden actually won the 2020 presidential election. Allegedly. It was so successful, in fact, and bolstered the wealth and power of the tobacco control industry by so many orders of magnitude that the tobacco controllers finally started getting noticed by the mainstream public health establishment. And slowly but surely, they were welcomed into the club on whose door they had been so insistently knocking for all those long years. In fact, the tobacco control industry had succeeded in amassing so much power and influence that the mainstream public health establishment, far from just starting to allow them in the club, started adapting their tactics. Because hell, if these guys can succeed in making 90% of the country believe you can die from smelling cigarette smoke, they can make anybody believe any damn thing. So we would do well to start hiring them and learning from their example and employing all of their preferred strategies that have been so successful. So to reiterate, when smoking was just a personal choice made by grown adults that most people happened to find icky and gross, that was a status quo where smokers at least still got to be treated like human beings with a couple of rights to speak of. But as soon as there was widespread success in getting the secondhand smoke myth ingrained in the public consciousness, well, then smokers became not just dummies with a gross habit, but murderers who are actively trying to kill you and your family. And when someone's a murderer who's trying to kill your kids with his evil fumes of death, well, that's a whole different matter than someone who's just giving off an odor that you find unpleasant. That murderer needs to be confronted, shouted down even. He's not a human being. He's doing violence on everyone here by smoking that cigarette. But now that same flawed, bigoted manner of thinking has infested not only the entirety of public health, but much of the public at large. And it sure ain't limited to smokers anymore. It is writ large across our entire public discourse. For people like the idiot who accosted Tucker Carlson in the Montana fishing shop, it is the main paradigm through which they view the entire world. If you express ideas that I find distasteful, irrespective of how factually correct or well-sourced they might be, you, sir, are doing violence on me. You are trying to kill me. Because remember what the guy said in the video clip. He told Tucker, looked him right in the eye and said, You are killing people with vaccine misinformation. And that right there is nothing more than the secondhand smoke fallacy being repurposed for purposes that are purely rhetorical, because wrong think is violence, just like silence is violence, because all things that I don't like are attempted murder. And as long as we agree on that, we can have a perfectly civil discussion, so I don't see what the problem is. And if you've never smoked a cigarette in anger in your entire life, if you're a person who has chosen not to take the vaccine, you're having the same playbook thrown at you right now that the smokers have had thrown at them for the past few decades. Oh, it's not about you, they sneer. It's about you trying to murder innocent people with your damnable selfishness, you awful, awful rat bastard son of a bitch. You either take the vaccine, or you want to murder people. Who needs any middle ground, or any nuance, or any critical thinking, when it's so much more fun to cut straight to calling people murderers? Because when I call people murderers, I feel better about myself, more secure in my own moral superiority, and in the end, isn't that what really matters? Oh, and meanwhile, did you hear the NFL is going to start fining players for not being vaccinated? Because, my God, for a league that concerns itself to such a maniacal degree with woke social justice posturing, I have an extremely difficult time believing they don't see the potential minefield of hazards in how this is going to play. Because how does this headline look? White employer forces black workers to undergo experimental medical treatment or be fired. Because doesn't that sound just a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? It starts with an R and ends with acist. I'm sure it'll come to me later. And last thing, before we go tonight, when the San Diego Chargers fucked off and moved to LA 4.5 years ago now, I came to understand just how gratifying it can be watching a team that you used to support getting itself embarrassed and humiliated week after week, but it never occurred to me that I would ever feel that same emotion about a U.S. national team. But I will be damned if I'm not feeling it. When the ladies' soccer team got shit-rocked by Sweden, I very much enjoyed hearing about it and making jokes at their expense. And when the men's basketball team did them one better by losing to France, I enjoyed hearing about that even more. Even though there's only one guy on the team, the U.S. team, whose name I have ever heard. And granted, I keep up with the NBA about as much as Rosie O'Donnell counts calories. But it seems like one hell of a long way from Bird and Magic and Jordan to whatever the hell this is. But there is something so very fitting, one might even say poetic, about an America-hating U.S. team losing to France in an empty arena. And you can't help being happy for the French. They've had so few victories since Waterloo, after all, but what a great bit of marketing vision by the dolts who run the NBA, going so all in on your China-loving America hatred that the net result is the American people taking gleeful delight in a loss to France. Yeah, very well done, NBA. How do you say keep up the good work in Mandarin? Better yet, how do you say when is this damn thing going to be over so I can go back to work in Japanese? An honest question, as disastrously as the first 3 days of this Olympiad have been, is there any scenario where this won't be the end of the modern Olympic movement as we have known it? Because I'm having a hard time saying one. And it could not happen to a nicer bunch of evil, malevolent assholes. That's it for me tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you back here Wednesday. Get off my lawn.